Good evening. Boy, there's just so much to say. I don't know where to start, but I'll just, first of all, let me just comment about Mr. Cummings' comment about the schools that are identified as high-achieving schools. Well, they're not all there now. One of the things we don't do well is understand what good teaching is. And I think in the study that was done, it was a one-year study, and I happened to take a look at that, and the schools that were identified are no longer high-achieving schools. So when you use data, you have to use it in a longitudinal way to really identify whether or not the variables and the subjects, it's a good study, but it failed in the continuity of it to see if these schools would sustain being high-achieving. You could have a good group coming through, and it could be an anomaly as opposed to a fact, okay? Just wanted to mention that out. In talking about schools, a couple things strike me as kind of an important. I would really add on to the point about high expectations. I believe that that's true. One of the difficulties we have in this country is that we have yet to come to a common understanding or acceptance of what we will accept as evidence that students are learning. We have 50 states, or we have regions that have all types of assessments, and it's like the House of Babel. For example, in Maine, we use the SAT to assess high school kids or students whether or not they're achieving the No Child Left Behind. We're the only state in the nation that does that. The SAT was never designed for the purposes being used, but yet it was augmented to do that. And I think the idea was noble in that it wanted to set the high bar, but to identify schools as failing based on the SAT, if you look at assessment experts across the country, they will tell you that that is a wrong move. So, number one, we have yet to come to common understanding across this country. What are our standards? So, from my perspective, the Common Core that you hear people talking about right now, I'm not opposed to it. I think it's a good idea. I think we have to come to a common understanding of what it is that we want to assess, and number two, a common understanding of what we will accept as evidence that students are learning. And in the world of testing, this is changing very, very drastically. Right now, we're using standardized tests. And I know that the Obama administration has approved 2 different groups to develop new testing procedures that will probably, some of them will probably look at more at adaptive testing, meaning if you're really going to look at student growth in a classroom, knowing that students come from various capacities when they enter, to measure the growth, you're going to have to take a look at more of a growth model than saying you all have to reach this certain level by the end of grade 3. If students coming into that grade are variable, have a tremendous variation in achievement. Not all students coming into school are prepared the same way. Okay? Now, particularly so we have this idea of a set of common assessments, of common standards, personalization that Clay mentioned. I certainly concur. I mean, we've attempted to reorganize, and we know that New York State, for example, is closing a lot of high schools and moving towards smaller high schools. I don't know if you've read what's going on in the state of California, of New York. Whether or not that's going to be fruitful, again, time will tell. But we do know that the effect of that, however, is that it's displacing a lot of kids who once, particularly the homeless kids, who had a school, have now more difficulty in accessing educational opportunities. But they're dismantling some of their larger high schools and making smaller schools. But I think the idea behind that is to try an attempt to deal with personalization and saying that if you have mentorships, if you have a significant adult in every child's life, chances are they're going to relate to the schooling and do better. What is also, in my view, lacking is a national perspective on education, the importance of education. We celebrate music, we celebrate athletic achievement, we all love both of those, but we do not celebrate scholarship. And I find that tremendously lacking in our country. And it's almost that we've reached a point to be competitive and to be where we want to be, we have to probably develop a national momentum as we probably did back in the early 60s, late 50s, with investments in science, and approach education and learning in a positive venue as opposed to looking at penalties. The other piece is professional development. We need to constantly invest in our people. Any industry that is good invests in its people. And we are facing a situation here too that probably within the next 2 or 3 years in our country we're going to be facing a tremendous shift in teachers. We probably will have a shortage. We have the so-called baby boomers approaching retirement age. I'm being the first group. And we're going to find that within the next 5 years there's going to be a tremendous reduction in the teaching force in this country. And we're going to be looking at our colleges, and we're going to be looking at probably innovative ways to attract potential teachers. And my sense is that we may need to look in non-traditional ways because, and I think this would go into if we had a kind of a national move towards education and giving some prestige to the teaching profession that it seems to be lacking in this country as opposed to when I look at some of the countries in Europe, in Asian countries. The teaching profession has a wonderful standard and a prestige that attracts some really bright, qualified individuals who want to go in to make a significant contribution to their country and to the youth. And we seem to be lacking that type of momentum in this country. Just a couple of things. I guess my time is, how much time do I have here? Okay. As you know, in Lewiston in particular, we have some significant challenges, not only ELL, we have poverty, a great deal. Over 60% of our students qualify district-wide for free and reduced lunch. And in addition to that, we face a challenge of mobility. One of the things that we've been unable to really get a good handle is why people move so often. It is not unusual in a particular classroom to start and have over 50% of your kids different at the end of the year. So when you start counting the number of impact, what does the impact is on the classroom, it's tremendous on the teacher, and it's difficult on the continuity of instruction. And the other piece that happens with this I mean, sometimes we've arrived at a testing frenzy that doesn't really tell us what we think we need to know. Because when we look at the No Child Left Behind and the types of testing, you test the student in the fall, and you test them the following year, and they're supposed to be at a particular standard. That really doesn't measure, it's the kids who are there that fall, not whether or not they were there for a year or two in your system to show any types of the improvement. So it really is a picture of your demographics at that time. It's a snapshot of who you are, not of what you've achieved. That's why we're going to need to look somehow at growth. And interestingly with this, I know there's a lot of conversation nationally and within our state to attach performance pay to value-added assessments. As many of you probably have read about that. The research that is emanating from that right now is that there really hasn't been a significant difference where in school systems where they paid teachers more for supposedly students achieving more, as opposed to control groups where that did not happen. The achievement level of students was negligible, which is kind of interesting. And I think they need more study of this to find out what is the motivator there. And so good teaching and good teachers is not solely on pay for performance. It's the culture that you build in the school. And I'll just end by saying what we're trying to do right now. I mean, as you know, Longley Elementary School was one of our schools that was identified as a school needing school improvement as one of the lowest performing. It's a school of approximately 60% ELL, 98% free and reduced lunch, and a great deal of mobility. We have changed, we adopted the turnaround model, which was one of the mandated models from the federal government. we were not asked how we would do it. So you choose one, or I think there are three models: close the school, do a turnaround model, or a transformation model. And we decided to take the more dramatic one, which was the turnaround model, because by doing so, it removed the yoke of No Child Left Behind and all this assessment of the previous 3 years. So we were able to start the school as anew. And however, with that, we had to change half the staff of the school. And what we attempted to do in establishing a new culture of the school was not only kind of a basic facelift, but it was also looking at investing in professional development a great deal in teachers. We have a working relationship with the University of Maine at Orono, where their teaching staff from the university are doing graduate work every single week. All our teachers are going through literacy programs in our schools. And additionally, all the classrooms have adopted a college. So we tell the students they're all going to college, from pre-K on. And they have a college mascot, and we talk about it. We talk the vocabulary of college. And what we find is that it's important, particularly with children of poverty, to give hope and give a direction as to why they're learning, and because they're not necessarily getting it at home. So we're going to be quite interested in seeing the progress and what's happening here with that particular school in this work endeavor that we're doing.